So what I want to kind of talk about tonight are show you what we've done to our yard to try to bring back native wildlife, and also kind of give you some lessons we've learned and we continue to learn as this thing evolves. We watched a program one time about somebody out in the Northeast that wanted to go back to doing organic farming and not using chemicals, all this thing. And for the first few years, every time they got a crop of something, and these were planting, apple trees and things like that, birds and various things would just come in and hammer everything. And this lady was getting very concerned. I watched a lot of HGTV, just so you know. Never did till about 4 years ago. Interesting. But there was an old timer there that said, just give it 7 years and things will balance out. And 7 years into her project of going organic farming and not using chemicals, things balanced out. So it just shows it takes time for nature to heal itself. And I don't know if 7 years is the trick, but it was a really good lesson for me. I've been obviously pushing the button, didn't even know it. Anyway, I work for what's called the Community Stewardship and Engagement Team. There are a team of 4, currently a team of 2. One of our staff left in February, and we're going to interview for her position in about 2 weeks. And my colleague, Tanya Homayoun, was with the Texas Nature Trackers program for, I think, almost 5 years, just took over as the state ornithologist. So she's highfalutin now. So if anybody's looking for a really good job that's kind of fun, there's one coming open here pretty soon. But anyway, so Texas Nature Trackers is part of the Wildlife Diversity Program, which is part of the non-game program. So if you think of wildlife organizations, there's usually small game, big game, and non-game, right? The things you hunt based on size, and then the things you're not supposed to hunt legally. So that's the program I work with, quite a few people. What we do with Texas Nature Trackers is my job is to try to engage people in community science. And we use the tool of iNaturalist to do that. The whole idea is that iNaturalist, how many of you use it or have used it or at least familiar with it? Very good. So iNaturalist is like walking around with a nature encyclopedia in your phone. It really is, as I'm sure a lot of you know. And it's a great way to connect people to the natural world and get them outside looking at the nature around them. iNaturalist was not developed by Texas Parks and Wildlife. It was developed by some college kids that were probably sitting in a dorm having a beer and whatever else out in California. That's why I had to do whatever else. Nothing against California, but we just as well bring those general those stereotypes to the fore. They had 2 purposes: connect people to nature, and then also generate biodiversity information. We've taken that, and that's what we do. So, for example, a week ago, I was at Hagerman National Wildlife Refuge with a Master Naturalist chapter up by Sherman, Texas. Next week, I'll be in Denton, Texas, doing a bio blitz with people. And the week after that, I'll be in the Panhandle doing the same thing. So the great thing about this job is I do get to do a little traveling, and we taxpayers get to pay for it. So I try to take it, do the best job I can. This is an example. This is as of today, over 6.6 million observations from iNaturalist just for Texas. So an organization like us that's trying to understand the flora and fauna of our state would be fools not to at least tap into this and get the information we can. We don't take every observation of a white-tailed deer and go, yep, there's one here. But for animals that are what they refer to as SGCN, or species of greatest conservation need, those animals, we're looking for information about them, both plants and animals. So that's why we have 12 projects that we help with, and that's a lot of data right there that we can mine for information to have a better understanding of what we do. So before I start, I always like to give a plug for this book, Aldo Leopold. If you haven't read it, shame on you. And this is your invitation to go get it. It's still out there. It's one of the best natural history books ever written, personal opinion. It'll inspire you. And so anyway, I want to encourage that. And then a couple of other books that are more current would be Doug Tallamy. How many of you have listened to a presentation of Doug Tallamy? I am not going to repeat everything he said because like he's the godfather of all this stuff at this point. I will tell you a short story. So we have a neighbor that is planted plants. Some of them are natives, not all of them, but some are native for bees and butterflies and whatnot. And they feed birds. And then the other day, I saw them out there with a tree company, tree fixing company or whatever, with a thing spraying up into the oak tree to kill the caterpillars and things. And I thought, why would you do that? Why would you plant plants, attract them, and then go kill their babies? So anyway, it's kind of weird. But if you haven't read any of these books, I encourage you to do that. You'll learn a tremendous amount. And then I'll give plug for two other books. Of course, Rufus Stevens' book. I was reading it, some parts of it. It's a great book, by the way. They're working on second edition, I believe. Really is a great book. And I was really proud of ourselves. The other day, I was reading a chapter about plants, woody plants to plant for birds. Every one of the ones he recommended is in our yard. I was like, by golly, he knew what I was doing. And then Kelly Conrad Bender is the urban biologist for the Austin area, wrote this lovely book, and it's got lots of ideas. And then, of course, there's many more, but I just want to give you those because I get a lot of my information from those different books. So that way I don't have to reference everything that I say tonight in specific things. So let's talk, first of all, if you're going to do this, we're doing it. Some people are going to do it for beauty. We did it because we wanted to attract bugs. We wanted to attract pollinators. And pollinators need a lot of things. Of course, they need pollen that they're going to use as their protein to feed their babies. They're going to use nectar because the nectar is what they use to power their daily activities for the most part. They get oils and other ingredients from certain flowers. Rhatany, for example, if you've ever looked at a rhatany flower under a microscope, it's a spectacular flower. And they have oils on the flowers. They don't get nectar from the rhatany. They get these oils that certain insects need. Another example would be the dead heads of blue mist flower, the dead heads of marble seed. You'll see certain butterflies specifically, most specifically the queen, will take its spit, its saliva, and wet the ends of the dead flowers and get nutrients that they need for reproduction. So even those dead flowers have benefit, okay? Okay, so keep that in mind. And of course, they have to have places to nest. So you'll see in some of our pictures, we've got some bare ground. You know, part of me was like, cover every square inch. But then I keep having to tell myself, well, some of those bees, actually, most bees are solitary. They don't nest in hives. We're not talking about the honeybee either. Most of them are solitary bees, and a lot of them nest in the ground, bare ground. They need bare ground, or they nest in the dead stems of your plants that you get tired of looking at because they're ugly and dead. You cut them off. You're taking away homes, potential homes for your bees. And that's really hard not to do because I still, Terry will attest, I've gone out there and go, okay, I can't take it anymore. And then I feel bad. And so I'll lay them there, but I don't think it works quite as well if they're not standing up. And of course, dead wood, grass hummocks, bumblebees will actually nest in big old grass hummocks of something like Lindheimer muley, something like that. Don't be surprised if you find a bumblebee nest in there sometime. So they need them. What do birds need? I just took that picture happened just 2 days ago. It was awesome at our water feature. What do birds need? They need seeds, they need insects and other arthropods, they need fruit, especially in the summertime when they're feeding babies. They're not generally feeding their babies, even if they're mostly seed eaters, they're not feeding their babies seeds. They're feeding them fruit or mostly insects, actually. They also need water, and that can come in different ways. They also need cover or shelter, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight, is how do we provide some of that natural shelter for them. And in doing so, we're also providing food sources for them as well. We can accommodate all three of those food sources with native plantings. All right, so some considerations that, and these come from mine and our experience of doing this kind of thing. What do you already have? So inventory, observe, document, protect what you have that's already native. And that's why go get a good field guide so you know what you're looking at, or use iNaturalist. It really will help you identify most of the plants. Natives are always going to be best, and I say that because they're adapted to our soils. You all know this. And importantly, the plants or the animals are adapted to finding them as food sources. So that's important. Select plants that have multiple flowers or flowers in clusters for ease of foraging, especially for pollinators. Tubular flowers are really good for bees, beetles, and flies. And then also, obviously, for hummingbirds. Have a mix of flowers that have shallow flowers and then deep flowers. And the reason I say that, in the spring, a flower that is super common all over the hill country in the springtime is Texas prairie parsley. How many of you are familiar with it? A little kind of yellowish flower. It's a parsley, so the leaves look like parsley leaves. When our plants are blooming in the garden in the spring, every little bee and wasp and fly are visiting these tiny little flowers because they all have really short proboscis or proboscis. So they can't get into deep flowers. So those shallow flowers are what I'm talking about. And that plant, I've got, I won't say thousands, but I've got almost 1,000 pictures of pollinators on just that one species from this spring. It's crazy how many things use it. Select flowers that provide nectar sources at different seasons. So you want to always have a few things blooming all the way from spring till fall and even into winter, especially in this part of Texas. Different size flowers. The more, basically what all this says, diversity begets diversity. So it's diversity in the flower colors, the flower size, the flower shape, all of that. The more diverse you have in your collection, the more diverse number of insects you're going to attract over time. Okay. And then, of course, avoid pesticides. All right. So where do you get plants and seeds? You all know this. You have a native plant sale coming up. I'll be in the Panhandle, darn it. But we're going to try and provide some plants, right? Yes. I've learned to grow a lot of plants in a little tiny greenhouse, let me tell you. And my yard is only so big. Yes.
You were talking about things, insects and everything. I was out this earlier in the spring and found out about something called secondary nectaries. Those are things on plants that will attract ants, and the ants will come and they will protect the plant from caterpillars. So those are.
And the reward is the nectary, right?
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm telling you, it's a complicated world out there in the garden. So again, the more you provide, the more you get. It really does work. Thanks for sharing that, Telmer. So you can find native plant rescues. You all have done that. There's a plot that's over here that just got the city's going to do something on. There's some native plants left there. I'm like, okay, we're going to have to sneak in there under the cover of dark and dig things out, or just ask the city for permission. That'd be the easiest thing to do. One of the things that I've done is one year I wanted some pink evening primrose, and there was a gentleman that kept mowing this motel ground, and just pink evening primrose everywhere. So I pulled into my car. In the spring, we always carry our little trowel around in a bag, and I'm not doing anything illegal, so I don't think. So I came out and I started talking to him, and he didn't understand English. And so I said, well, I'm just going to take these before you mow them. So can you wait? So I'm digging up the plants, and he's just watching me. And now we've got them everywhere. It doesn't take many of those, by the way, to have them spread. And keep it. And that's a good rule. That's a good lesson. When you take a native plant out of its surroundings with all its competition, it can become as weedy as dandelion. So keep that in mind, right? Everybody knows that, okay? They don't just stay in their place and go, yep, we're just going to behave ourselves and stay right here. They're going to go for it. And the plants that I've got an Indian grass in our yard, that I swear to God is multiplying a half a foot a day this way, to the point where I'm going to have to, I don't know, chop through it and try to divide it 40 times and set it back just a little bit. And then also, again, grow your own seed. And I'll show you a couple of slides about the basics of that real quickly here in a moment. Make sure you have a good field guide. There's nothing more frustrating than a naturalist like me gets a call and somebody goes, hey, I've got this plant, or I've got this bird, and they describe it, and it sounds like nothing I've ever heard of. And the next question is, do you have a field guide for that? No. I'm like, okay. And I could just make up a name and they go away happy. But no, not really. Although it is tempting. But anyway, one of the things I do with my wildflower guide, although if you can find it out at Guadalupe River State Park, I lost it about 6 years ago. And it should still be okay unless it's completely decomposed. But I keep track of when things start to bloom. And that's why I use iNaturalist. I actually have an iNaturalist project that I'll show you at the end of the presentation. I use that to track the phenology of when things start to bloom each year. So it may be the same plant, but it's when it blooms, and that's changing, and it varies. With, this year is very different because we're in a drought. So timing, I've got lots of green in my garden, but very few flowers yet. So I was hoping that this was going to be that rainy week that the weather forecaster said it was going to be, and clearly they were wrong. So let's talk about our house. So around 4 years ago, we purchased this little, Terry likes to call it a cottage. I will give you a caveat. This is what it looked like when we bought it, and then you're going to see slides as it transitions along with the garden, as we've updated it. But this was our front yard. The upper photograph, backyard. Notice it has a lot of non-native stuff. All of the big tall trees in the yard are pecan. I know a pecan pie is really good, but God almighty, do these trees produce a lot of fruit, and thus a lot of squirrels. And by the way, they can set down a taproot of about 1.5 feet in about 3 months if you disregard the little seedlings when they come up. And they're really hard to dig up. But it had St. Augustine grass. It had non-native trees and shrubs, including andina, olive, boxwood, all of those. It had irises, purple heart, liriope, vinca. I only know these things because Terry knows these things. I do not know non-native plants. And then some things that look like they grow in the tropics. So a lot of people thought this was lovely, and it really was. It's beautiful and green. We kind of had a different vision. So the first thing when we bought this house, we actually had a little greenhouse, which was lovely. My first ever greenhouse. Sadly, all the panels are yellowed. All the wood was rotted, and we rebuilt it piece by piece. So now it's functional, except it's still yellow. We're going to have to address that. And we started growing our own seedlings, just collecting seedlings from the roadside and start growing them, and had tremendously lovely success with that, to the point of I need to buy an acreage to put more of them on. We literally tried to get the guy to let us buy the lot next to us, and he said no. And we were like, well, you're not doing it. It's just St. Augustine. Let's turn it into a prairie. And so what we do is we do gather seeds from the plants now. These are columbines. And I did an experiment because a lot of you know, plants have to be cold, go through a cold treatment, the seeds do, to germinate well. So on May 15th, I put some of them in vermiculite with some water to keep them moist and wet and cold in a refrigerator for about, way more than 6 weeks. And then I just planted some straight away right after they ripened. It took about 2 months for the seeds in the greenhouse that didn't go through stratification to finally germinate. It took 2 days for them to start germinating after I did treatment. So for those of you that grow seeds, and I see a smile back there in the corner, and one right there, he's thinking about it too. Stratification really works. The other way works, but you got to be really, 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 really patient. What that also tells you, if you gather seeds and you don't want to go through all the stratification stuff and put them in flats and do all that stuff, get them out on the ground where you want them before fall, or by fall, let them naturally stratify. You'll get better germination. But the other thing to keep in mind is they don't all turn into massive full-grown plants the first year. So they may be down there underneath all the dead stuff and amongst the other plants that are growing. So be patient with native wildflower planting.
Those red columbine?
Red columbine, yeah. Yep. So if you need any, I think there were 453 of them or something like that. They're not really very big yet, though. Next spring's plant sale, however, yeah. Now, I'm throwing this picture in here because I love this garden. It's at the Bernie Visitor Center. I think it's beautiful. I've never gone over there a day and didn't think it was beautiful. Now, but it's another example of you just can't plant it and leave it and it's going to stay beautiful, right? The folks that go over there from y'all, the Master Naturalists, put a lot of work into this garden. But if you haven't seen this garden by the Bernie Visitor Center, go check it out. This is a more what I would call a manicured native plant garden. Okay, and the reason I show you these beautiful pictures is because mine doesn't look like that at all. Okay, so there's different ways of approaching it, but I want to show you that these were taken today. It's spectacular. Okay, so you can use native plants in a more formal setting and really turn out a really nice product. I, however, am going for wild and woolly. And amazingly enough, Terry's allowed me to do it. So this is the front yard when we started. This was the front yard 2 years later when it was nice and rainy and green. Now it's kind of unfair because that common sunflower over there on the left makes it look really spectacular. But just to kind of show you a reference point, this was my little red bud right here, not yet above the fence. By the way, this little wooden picket fence, as you all may know, there are a couple of deer in Bernie. We live right across from Cibolo Creek, and there are many deer down in the creek, both axis and whitetail. We have a very small yard, it's 0.22 acres, and most of it's house and a garage. So we put this picket fence up because, well, we always wanted a picket fence. And I maintained that if we put this picket fence up, I didn't think the deer would come into the yard because it's so small. Now you laugh. We have never had a deer in that yard. Since we put up that picket fence, the axis deer like to go under things. No way to go under. And whitetail deer, of course, they can jump that easily. It's so small and so compacted with stuff. And we've got a really vicious dog. A vicious dog named Allie. Really. No, we do, but she's not vicious. Boy, that house looks like it's just covered with mold, doesn't it? It's crazy. We've never had a deer in the yard, and there are everything in that yard they can eat and would like to eat. Everything we put out here, they don't like to eat, and we've never seen them feed on anything in our yard. So it does work, but again, if you have 3 acres and you put up a 4-foot fence, never mind, that's not going to work. So just to show you, oh yes, go ahead. Yeah. Yes. We'll talk. I will talk about that. In fact, it's actually a good time to talk about it. So there's a lot of shade in our yard. So I just plowed forward and said, I'm going to plant what I want to plant. Let's see how they respond. Because pecan trees have a real dappled shade. So there's always a little bit of sun that sneaks through in different parts of the yard. One of the things we did, we had a tree that was needed a bunch of limbing up. So we did do a little bit of limbing because this is my primary garden over here. So we did a little limbing right here just to add a little more morning sun and a little afternoon sun. And it's worked pretty well. There are some plants that we're going to probably move from the backyard where it's a little denser shade to the front yard and give them a little more sun. They've struggled a little bit more. But by and large, we're kind of sorting that out as we go. But it is a lesson. And so we try to figure out where do we have a little bit of sunlight that we can take advantage of. And even if it's only for a few days or a few hours a day. And I think it's okay because it gets so bloody hot in the summertime, the more shade they have, the better off they are. As soon as that sun hits them, you just see them start to wilt. I don't care how watered they are, they still just start to wilt. Oh, we have, well, we had Sotals. I dug those up and replaced them with Lindheimer Muley. Terry? All through here. They don't, and then we also have a bunch of woolly ironweed. They have not touched the woolly ironweed, and it's a beautiful plant. And it's easy to grow from seed, really easy to grow from seed. What's that? Yes, I do. Yeah, that's exactly right. And the other caveat I'll throw in here is the soil here, you can dig as far as you want. The only thing you're going to hit some clay. So the only rocks in our yard are somebody brought in, and we've made them into a water feature and a walking path. So sorry. Disclaimer, we're very lucky. Thousands of years of Cibolo Creek flooding, bringing up all that lovely soil. So we're taking, now this is this year. It's sad to see the difference. That's the drought. Okay, but here's what's really neat. This red bud here and this red bud here, notice how much farther above the fence they are. So they've grown up really well. We've got Turk's cap in here that are now up above the fence line. The whole idea is that from there's going to be a morning that Terry's going to sit on that little wicker chair and won't be able to see that picket fence because of all the thick vegetation. Okay, she doesn't allow me to sit on it because there's a leg giving way, and I refuse to be accused of breaking her wicker chair. What's that? Painted the house. There you go. Thank you. Terry just said big improvement. There you go. There you go. That was all her doing. I've got so many stories about that paint job that I could tell you, but we don't have time. Ask me when Terry's not around, and I'll share you some good stories. Anyway, so that's what it looked like. Now, this is, if you looked out the front door, this is what it looked like. 2020, that's what it looked like. This year, it's a lot very different, simply because of the drought. But it's still thick and pretty green. There's still a lot of diversity in there, but you can see the difference year to year makes. And the grass is St. Augustine. We've given a little bit of the grass to our puppy. My goal is to change it all out to buffalo, but there's a lot of shade there, so we'll see how it goes. But this is an evolving project. So yes.
Okay, not a native.
Not a native, but it's.
So if you're looking at resale value, you want to leave little thing on, not why we did it. We just haven't gotten to do buffalo there.
Yeah.
And we don't have enough time.
Although we're gonna give it a shot, but it's again, this is, yeah. So all of this was St. Augustine when we started, and we literally took a fork, I punched it into the ground, turned the soil over, took all the roots and dug them out. This is all by hand, not one power tool at all. So, what's that? They look terrible. Thank goodness. So anyway, you can see that this is an evolving thing. So the yard, the green grass is evolving, everything that's in here. And what's amazing is how fast things move around from where I planted them, right? And I have no idea how they move around so much, but they do. This is before so we started with this over here. In fact, all I did was cut out a little piece of yard here and planted a bunch of seeds and put in some seedlings just to get it started. And you can see, again, there's what it looks like over the course of years. This was up by the house. This was back in 2020. This is 2021. Here's what it looked like in the spring, because we had a whole different set of things blooming, obviously. So it's not quite as big and rank as it's going to be in the summertime. So some people might go, that's beautiful. We want that to look like that all the time. No, it's not going to happen, right? And you will also notice that I have Gulf Coast penstemon in here. So it's native to Texas. So I've bent my rule a little. Still native to Texas, but most, that's the purple one, yeah. But the bees, the native bees, love it in the springtime. The problem is this summer when it's super hot, it doesn't do well, but it does grow really well in the shade.
Does that come back next year?
Yes, for a few years. Some of it's starting to die off, and I don't know if it's just aged out or if it's drought, but these are super easy to germinate in a flat. It may, it should. Gulf Coast penstemon. P-E-N, penstemon. It is an early bloomer. Yeah, the early emerging bees love this stuff. And it's just a pretty little flower. And you can see I've got it scattered all over the place. And I grow it by the bucketful from seed.
Wow.
So easy to germinate. They produce tons of seeds. So this is our front bed as of today. And the reason I'm showing you these pictures, it looks like craziness. But the reason I'm showing this, one of our goals is to create a thick ground layer that birds and other animals can use to move around without being exposed to predators. So in this front yard the other day, a mourning warbler was moving through our front yard at the ground underneath all of these plants. And that's what they do. They're an understory bird. A mourning warbler should not show up in a suburban yard very easily. And we had two of them in the same day, one in the front yard, one in the backyard. We've got yellow warblers all over the place. So those, by creating that density, I'm creating places for birds to hide and hunt for the insects and spiders that are also hiding in there. Okay, so I'm trying to think as holistically as we can.
You also don't have cats?
No, oh no. Well, I won't say that because Bernie unfortunately won't get serious about their cat problem. But I have a wrist rocket and small rocks. Don't say that. Yeah. Hey, one time I hit a squirrel in the head and the squirrel just looked over at me like, I mean, seriously. I'm like, golly, man. And then I kind of felt guilty that I might have given it a concussion. Anyway, so then on this side of the front yard, we had all these irises and liriope and other things. I have no idea what they were. So we started working around the edge of the yard. So we didn't go full bore and go, okay, we're tearing it all up right now today. We started small and started expanding each year. And so we started on the edge after we put up the picket fence. You can see the bed back in 2020. Wasn't a whole lot of stuff there. Up here in this upper right-hand corner is a little red bud tree and a few other things. But over time, it's starting to evolve, and things are getting bigger. Some things come in and then they die off, and other things come in that we didn't plant, and that's okay. We let the things kind of evolve as they wish. And then here's the front of the house. That was liriope, right? Mostly. Or liriope. Okay. Again, I don't do natives. We had that magnolia tree. We actually cut it off and turned it into a bird feeder. Worked great until it rotted away in the backyard. But you'll notice, again, we put a little, Terry doesn't like straight lines. So I try to, somebody else said yes. Terry, they agree with you. So just kind of show, and again, then the other thing we found in the yard were a bunch of these. We've been growing all kinds of native vines up on those. So again, another way to kind of spread things out a little bit. And then this is the front, in front of the picket fence, and it changes every year. In the spring, you see all the pink evening primrose. In the fall, we get a lot of cowpen daisy. The cowpen daisy, which I love, because it blooms all summer long. Everybody likes it. Blooms when the monarchs are migrating through. But over time, it drops off to where you can't hardly find them. So even though it's an annual and it drops a ton of seeds, for whatever reason, it just kind of evolves out of your yard. So you kind of got to reintroduce it after a while. Or at least that's what I'm doing. Here's our backyard. There it is before. It looks very pretty and green. This is what it looked like in the springtime after we cut all that stuff out. What we were trying to do is, you'll notice there's the ground layer and there's a canopy layer and there's nothing in between. So our goal in the backyard is to create all the layers you would see in a forest, in again, very small space. And so we started planting trees, Mexican plum, redbud. We got a couple of maple trees. We've got all kinds of things back here. And we started creating a ground cover. First of all, we got rid of all of this trailing Boston ivy, was it? Boston ivy that went up over all the trees. It actually did, didn't it? So all these vines, these were all green. It was lush and green because it was this Boston ivy, and it had taken over this entire bed out to about 6 or 7 feet. And let me tell you, that's a lot of digging. And then it was growing through the fence. So we now pretty much eliminated it. Every once in a while I see a sprig and then it's gone. So we're in the process. So this was today. Okay. So again, now you're starting to see, granted it's still short, but now we've got kind of a shrub layer through there. Eventually we'll begin to continue to fill in that gap so that birds, especially warblers that are migrating through, will have all kinds of different layers and levels that they can come through and visit. The birds that want to be in the high up in the trees have already got that, but the mid-story and the understory birds can then utilize the yard. So that's our goal. This is the back. This is where all that ivy was. When we did our pecan trees, we put down too much. I put down too much mulch. I won't blame Terry for that. I put it all down and she moved it all around. Cut once, move once. Unfortunately, I learned a lesson there. But again, we're creating that shrub layer, that ground layer. We've got some bare ground, and every time I go out and look at that bare ground, I think I need another shrub. But we're letting it evolve a little bit, okay? And then here's again, some of those trees. This was today. And then we took all the rocks that were just happened to lay around in the yard and we made a water feature. I'll show you that in just a moment. And then this is that up against the garage. We had an old bird bath that's now melted. That was there when we got there, and the cedar waxwings went nuts. Here's the problem with water and cedar waxwings and robins. They go to the bathroom a lot. And you know, I heard earlier you're going to be pulling trees, non-native trees. Those are the ones they're dropping. And by the way, in each one of their poops, there's 3 seeds. Because when I pull them out in the spring, they come in 3s. Okay?
They're not turkeys.
No, that's exactly. Yes, there you go. Thank you. Harder because this is really dense shade. Doesn't get as much rainwater, but we're doing, what I'm learning to do is there's some places where native shrubs grow better than forbs. And so I'm kind of saying, well, you know what? Turk's cap is a fantastic plant. Rock rose is a fantastic plant. They drop their seeds. I get sprouts of seedlings. I can move them around the yard and fill in those gaps when the forbs just don't want to do it. And again, here's the side yard. That thing was, by the way, oh, those are terrible to cut down. And they're full of roaches. It is gross how many roaches hide in those. Yes, in the bark of it. Gross. So again, we're starting to move through this and put in things here in the front of the house. This is a good place for columbine and a few other things. We took these 2 rock piles and turned them into this. So one of the things we did is we found some frostweed. And if you need any, we've got a couple. They have massive root systems, even when they're little. And then we took that place, this thing right here, and we actually dug it out because I have soil. And we put a liner in it, and then we put the soil back on top and made kind of a wet garden. So we have grown cardinal flower and several other things from down by the creek where we grab seeds, so we can maintain that. Now, the cardinal flower lasted really well 1 year, 2 years, and then died. So, and by the way, they are hard to germinate from seed so far. And then there's our water feature. Again, these were just rocks that were laying around the house. And we had some odd spots. We just filled those in with wildflowers as we went along. There's that old magnolia tree. The birds loved it. But then the branches all started rotting off, so it's no longer there. So the evolving results. This is our project. I printed this off today. 459 species we've documented in a yard that's 0.22 acres, most of which is a house and a garage. Okay. Of those, 68 species of birds have visited our yard. Now here's the deal. If it flies overhead, if it's a flock of sandhill cranes and it goes over my airspace, it's our bird. Okay. So that might be just a little elevated. They have not landed at the water feature yet. We did, however, have a ringed kingfisher fly by the house this morning. It went on eBird. I couldn't put it on iNaturalist, so I couldn't get a photo. It was in the creek a couple of days ago. I found it there and photographed it. 199 species of plants. Most of those we put in. Now, some of them aren't still there. Some are. We keep adding, and they just kind of evolve. But we've done pretty good in a tiny little space, right? And then where's my insect one? Yeah, this is the great one. 176 species of insects. Now remember, this is a yard that was nothing but a few non-native plants and St. Augustine grass. And in 4 years, we've found 170 that can be named to species. We've found a lot of other bees you just can't name unless you have an electron microscope or something. But it's really well. These are, I'm not going to go through all this, but this is all the native stuff we've planted, the woody plants, the vines. By the way, I love Alamo vine. Oh my God. If you need any, I've got some. But if you're trying to maintain something really neat, look, it goes crazy, but it forms a wonderful barrier for being seen behind. But it's an amazingly incredible plant.
Did you plant from seed or little plants?
We planted from seed. I grew Alamo vine. It germinates like crazy. It wasn't hard to germinate at all. Yep, a couple of those. Those are slow growing. And then, of course, the vines. And then we've got lots and lots of forbs of different kinds. And we put in a lot of grasses. A lot of people don't think about putting in native grasses, but a lot of insects and things use those native grasses. Plus, they create structure that the forbs can grow on. It makes for a nice intermingling. And it looks more real as you would see it out in the wild. So these are just a few photographs just to show you some of the diversity of plants that we have. Some of the butterflies, just a handful of the butterflies we've seen. A few more. We've now got plants that we put in that specifically are host plants for some species, and we've been fortunate that way to find them. Wasps are some of the most fascinating insects out there, and there's a ton of diversity, and most of them won't give you the time of day. They don't bother you at all. They are the ones that are eating caterpillars and grubs under the ground and all of these things. That's what they lay their eggs on to feed the babies. But for their own food, they need nectar and some pollen, but mostly nectar. So you can have a great diversity of bees. I've learned so much about wasps. It's been amazing. And then, of course, some of our birds, we did put up a couple of bird houses with some success for titmice and chickadees who argue with each other all the time. These are birds that have last year there were times we had 25 to 30 indigo and painted buntings in our backyard. We use white millet, only white millet, and then sunflower seeds, and they love the white millet. I couldn't get a picture of the bloody things without a piece of white millet in their beak, but it sure was spectacular. All of these other birds came to the water feature. These are all migratory. That's the summer tanager, Blackburnian warbler. Oh my. Western tanager this spring, shouldn't be here. Yellow warblers up there, an adult and a young one. Painted bunting female, male indigo bunting, bay-breasted warbler, stunner. Baltimore oriole just the other day over there on the far left.
What's the one second from the right?
This one? Yeah. Blackburnian warbler. These are birds that normally would bypass a neighborhood like ours in a heartbeat. But by providing water and shelter and food options, they start to visit.
Is that extinct?
No, that's an indigo bunting. Yeah, indigo bunting, male indigo after second year. So anyway, spectacular. And then I took this picture this weekend. I want check it out. There's a cardinal, a young cardinal. You can see the beak is not bright orange. This is a bathing lesser goldfinch, a waiting to bathe yellow warbler, a bathing summer tanager, and up there a Baltimore oriole that's trying to figure out what's going on. And I work every day, and Terry gets to sit and watch this. Completely not fair. I wanted to show you this video. Let's see if it'll play. This goes on every day with this little water feature. So that's a yellow warbler in the lower left, and that's an Inca dove up in the upper right. And this happens all the time. It's amazing how often birds are using this thing. All the time. And now that the Inca comes down and wants a drink, or watch how they drink too. Most birds have to dip their bill and tip it back to let water run down their bill. This guy's got like a sucking straw in there. And then one more, and this is a lesson that we've been watching. These are false indigos, Amorpha fruticosus. And we planted them there, and then we put this in. I had the idea I wanted a water feature near this because this is more of a wetland plant. We found some elderberry and we put it there. The idea is to grow up woody. We've got a button bush behind us. And the idea is to cover the backside of this up to provide cover for birds coming in to drink and bathe. What I want you to watch are these two stems right here for the next 30 seconds. There's a chickadee up there, just arrived. Another chickadee. It's clockwork. These birds use it. Notice there's vegetation above the stem, so it's hiding them from above. They got thicker stuff back here. There's a yellow warbler that was on the camera. Just jumped. And there's another yellow warbler, and notice how they all use those stems. So if you do this kind of thing, think like a bird a little bit. It was accidentally perfect in our case. But again, it's just waiting. There it goes. Anyway, so what's next? We're going to continue to weed out remnants of non-natives. We're always going to have weeds coming in that we don't want. Some of them come in on my boots or shoes. Some come in with our puppy dog. Some come in just because it does somehow magically. So we're going to continue to do that. We'll add species as we can. And we're just learning. This is an ongoing process. And we'll slowly expand what we can as we go. And then I'm just going to take lots of pictures.